So, what I want to talk about right now, this relates to social work with victims of abuse, this relates to family counseling, this relates to women in social policy. I would suggest this might relate to kind of anything you're ever doing if you're in a social worker kind of capacity somewhere. I also want to say on the word social worky, I've always hesitant to say social work because some people don't use that word, and myself personally, I'm a little bit hesitant to use that label because some of us have a degree in psychology, some of us have maybe a master's degree in gender studies, sometimes the people in your agencies have a degree in nursing, sometimes people have 20 years of experience as a social justice activist. Also the label social work, as I've said in other videos, sometimes social workers are despised and loathed, so why bring it up, why go there? Among Indigenous people, many of them loathe and despise us, and for a variety of good, reasonable reasons. So that's why I say social work E, or social justice activist, or artivist, or creative person in the community. Some people call themselves cultural workers, in the sense that they're trying to bridge cultures, and they're using culture, drumming, singing, art, protest, rally, culture as a way of bringing about social change. So I just thought I'd mention that because I haven't mentioned it for a while. Social work E, like wiggle space right there at the end of that label. So having said that, I want to talk today a little bit about paper trail. So documents. The main chunk I want you to attend to is the code of ethics. And at first you kind of go, yeah, of course, I'm very committed to the code of ethics. Hold that thought. Here's where I want to go. In many contexts, you'll be, if you remember our video on interdisciplinarity, you might have a person sitting beside you who is a nurse in your agency, and they have a code of ethics. You might have someone who is, as I said, has a master's degree in gender studies, and they don't have a code of ethics because it's not a professional association. You may have someone who graduated with a BA in English. They don't have a code of ethics. But you, as a registered social worker, have a code of ethics. And therefore, you have certain kinds of accountability that you will be pressured and located to step up to. So, having said that, I'm going to take you through a little journey. So, day one, you go for your job interview. You're pretty excited. They're excited. You do your job interview. They call you the next day and they want to hire you. You go, yay. They go, yay. What is the next thing you want to be doing during your honeymoon phase with the organization? You want to get your job description written down in as much detail as possible. Sometimes during the job interview they say, oh, we'll have you do some stuff and it'll be with people and it'll be creative and it'll involve people and feelings and other administrative duties as assigned. And you go, yay, that sounds exciting because it's the first glimpse into the organization and your heart is full of happiness and hope and vigor, and they are good people doing good things. But what I recommend for you is right now during this honeymoon phase, and they've just hired you, so it's a very good time, it's a time of positivity, if you want to be wise and prudent. Send an email, let's say, and say, I'm so excited to have accepted this job in which I will be doing the following 9 things in the following priority order. Have I understood my job description correctly? Could you please get back to me by Thursday? Could you please confirm you've received this email? This may sound a little bit sort of CIA, FBI, a little bit paranoid, a little bit hostile. But what you want to do is get a paper trail to affirm what are you in fact being hired to do. Having said that, I'll give you why am I paranoid. I worked at workers' compensation, I've worked at a hospital, I worked in an eating disorders clinic, I worked in small nonprofit organizations, I've done gig work where it's an honorarium to get this one thing done. I've worked now with about 1,700 students in my 23 years of teaching. So those are third-year students, fourth-year students, master's level students, people who've graduated who see me in conferences or in the mall and they update me, and I always ask, so are you working? Where are you working? Are you happy? What's going on? And I've heard a lot of stories where people took a job thinking they were going to be doing these 20 things, and as time went on they found themselves doing these other 20 things, or doing the 20 things but doing them in a way they hadn't at first imagined. So you go to your job interview, you're very excited, you get hired. Whatever that job ad that was in the paper or on the website or wherever you found out about this job, make 10 copies of that job ad and hide it all around your office. Put it in your journal. When they've hired you, send that follow-up email. It is my understanding that I will be doing these tasks in this order for this many hours. Get it in writing. Don't just get it verbally. It sounds a little bit suspicious and nervous, but just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, I think is the t-shirt version of that one. Get it in writing. So then they send it back to you and they say, yes, we're very excited for you to do these 3 things and these 5 things for this many hours and so on. If you want to be very wise and prudent and self-loving and organizational loving, push it even a little further. What will be the priorities? Because often in social justice organizations, they'll list you 1,000 things which you obviously cannot actually do. So like, we'll respond to all the needs of all the women in all of northern BC. No can do. That's unrealistic. Yeah. So if you have to make tough choices in the moment with your job description, what are the priority issues and how are you to decide that?
You can ask other questions, because I know that, like, personally going into other jobs, I found that at first it was kind of hard to ask those questions, or like ask, like, for example, like talking about pay or talking about like personal questions, like what to expect when you're on a job site, what they're looking for, what like all of those basic little things that you should be able to ask normally. You feel weird asking, and I don't know if it's like a also like a female thing. Like I've noticed a lot of my female friends have a really difficult time being assertive in that way.
It's assertiveness, it's professional, it's clarifying the boundaries, it's clarifying expectations, and I think that's just so profound about, yes, part of it is female, and social work is a female-oriented kind of profession, and we're also humble, and we don't want to sound like we're just here for the money, or we're just here for the raise, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want to sound uncompassionate,
or ungrateful.
Being grateful and being compassionate is also being clear. Mm-hmm. What do you want me to do? What are the priorities? Because there will be tough choices. Do I first respond to, if I make that imaginary kind of thing, you're responding to all women's needs in all of northern BC. Well, that's bizarre, right? Mm-hmm. That's delusional.
Yeah. So if you're going to force me to triage, then which would you consider the most important versus least
important? Is it 15 to 20-year-olds? Is it single mothers? Is it Indigenous folk? Is it people with addictions? Is it people with concurrent mental health disorders? Trying to get a priority list, and you have it in writing. The second thing I would recommend that you do, so you've had that charming chat, you got hired, they want you, it's honeymoon time, you've got the emails going back and forth. I would also put in place back and forth, if they haven't given you if they've already given you 85 documents, well, you're probably covered. But sometimes in these jobs they don't really give you anything beyond some tiny little blurb, right? So then you force the situation also with these kinds of questions. If I'm ever in doubt about this or that, what is the chain of command? Who do I go to first with this issue? And if they're not available, who do I go to next? So let's say you're working, a wonderful organization here in Prince George is called Reconnect. And it's a place for youth. And it's right across the street from the AWAC. And so it's a small kind of drop-in center for youth who are on the street. I think they're under age 19. And they can come in any time of the day or night and get a meal or have a coffee, just have a time out. There's also places where they can sleep. And then I think upstairs there's longer term residency. They can stay there for up to a year, I think. So that organization, given that it's a 24/7 kind of organization, they have frontline staff doing the delivery. Then there might be frontline staff but who've been there for years and years and have a lot of wisdom and a lot of insight about how to handle things. But then there's the executive director of that organization. But then Reconnect is owned by, I believe, the Friendship Center. And the First Nations Friendship Center owns maybe 50 different programs here in northern BC. They're again, very wide-ranging, and there's a lot of talent, and there's a lot of very specific programs that are offered. So you want to be clear, what is the chain of command? What is the chain of clarification? If I need clinical advice, who do I go to? If I need practical advice, who do I go to?
If I need organizational advice, who do I approach?
Who do I approach? And this will not show you to be greedy or argumentative or difficult. If you're being hired by a reasonable organization, they should be delighted that you're asking these kind of questions up front and that you're asking for them in writing so that you can remember in the future. You right? Kind of have, not just to remember, but also you want to pin people down. In many of these organizations, people come and go. Often people work somewhere for 3 years, they move on, 2 years, they move on, they move up, they move around. That's the nature of working in northern BC, in my experience. So whatever that team was who hired you, you want to make sure that 6 months from now, in case they're both gone, let's say you got hired by 2 people, they did the interview with you, you want to be clear you got this in writing. So even if it changes 6 months from now or a year from now, somebody is responsible to inform you that it's changed, which doesn't always happen. If you thought, oh, so-and-so is my boss or my go-to for this or that, well, maybe they've retired. Maybe they're sick. Who's the next person in the chain? So you want to get a full and detailed documentation of what your responsibilities are. You want to have a plan B built in. So if this doesn't work out, or I can't meet these 100 expectations on any given day, what do I refer out? What do I put on a wait list? Who do I prioritize today? You want that in writing. You also want in writing who is the go-to if there's ever a conflict. Because another thing you'll have in nonprofits, in social work, social justice activism, sometimes 2 people will tell you to do something on the same day, but it's impossible to make both of them feel fulfilled. So, for example, you two with the Women's Center, we've had, over the years that I've been involved with the Women's Center, sometimes Sarah may think, oh, I'll get them to do this and that, and I'll ask the students, could you do this and that? So I've been very clear with the students always that, or I try to always be clear, maybe not always in writing, but I try to be clear through emails and phone calls to say, well, what are the solid deadlines? So sometimes there's a solid deadline. This has to be done in the next 30 days. So that's got to be top. The situation, like creativity night is on that particular night. We can't say, oh, well, you'll do creativity night some other night, because that's when it's happening, right? So there's certain things that the external world builds in as a deadline, and that's that. But then there's other things that can be kind of fluid, and you get around to them when you get around to them. Or if you're never going to get around to them, let me know and I'll delegate them to someone else, or we'll just throw them off the table for now. So all of that, if you want to be wise as a social worker doing social work with victims of abuse or family counseling, all of this is what you need to understand and ideally to have in writing. So you've got, now you wake up now, you've been in the job for a few months or a month, you've got your really clear job description from the people who hired you, you've got your very clear priority list from the person who's your direct supervisor. You've got a clarity of a web of like, okay, if this doesn't work on a Tuesday, ask this person, phone this person. You've got that all mapped out. You're empowered. You're way more effective. You're going to be able to deliver better care to the victims you're working with, to the families you're working with, to your colleagues, and to the agency. You're going to have that as a clear line of what's going on. You aren't going to be bringing more chaos into the organization, because when something happens, you know, okay, my paper trail that I've been keeping, or my portfolio, or these are documents you want to keep near your desk or right on the top of your desk to know what to do in any moment. Fabulous. Now here's the next thing you've got to get to know is the documents for your organization. Ideally, learn the chain of command and all that stuff that you figured out just now for you, for your closest colleagues. So if you're working in an organization and one of your co-workers is a nurse and she's supervised by someone else, that could, let's say you're working in some addiction program. Or when I worked at the eating disorders clinic, I was there as a social worker. There was a nurse who worked with me. There was a dietitian who worked with me. There was a psychologist who worked with me, and there was a occupational therapist. So we would meet once a week, and we would go through the case files of the people who are struggling with anorexia, bulimia, compulsive overeating. Okay, and as you can imagine, a nurse and a psychologist, a dietitian, I'm not sure if I said that, a dietitian, each of these people has their body of knowledge that they're bringing to the table. There's your whole interdisciplinarity stuff. Mm-hmm. Then you're also going to have, they each have their discipline, they each have their job description, they each have their code of ethics, they each have their go-to and their priorities. The wiser I can be about the paper and documents that are guiding everybody else's behavior, the more potent I can be in my job. Because I'm going to be doing things I need to do and not jumping into somebody else's lane. Mm-hmm. And also making clear to them, hey, you're in my lane. Right? When they're let's say, overreaching. They're the person who's, let's say, the dietitian, who may not know very much about, let's say, schizophrenia and drug abuse or something, if maybe that's my expertise in this agency. But if she doesn't know that, and she's overreaching, it is good for me to note that with that client, with that nurse or whatever, dietitian, and say, let's talk, let's you and me have a coffee, and kind of review what specifically are the boundaries in our roles here. Mm-hmm. And you do that with diplomacy, with tenderness, with reasonableness, and you've got those emails and that job description and that clarity that you harvested at the beginning of your contract. Mm-hmm. And that will serve you well. Now here's the next thing that I want to talk about, is codes of ethics. So you may assume everybody's got the same codes of ethics, but they may not. The nurse, the social worker, the dietitian. When I worked at workers' compensation, there were 2 people who worked on my floor who had been real estate agents before they worked at workers' comp. So they were not registered social workers. They had no code of ethics. They were real estate agents. I'm not going to put any shadow on real estate agents, but the way that they approached an injured worker was often quite different than how I would approach the needs and struggles of an injured worker. And it wasn't that they didn't like me or that I didn't like them. It's they had a different wisdom that they were bringing to the moment. They had a different worldview. They had different training and a different code of ethics, i.e. no code of ethics. They were just trying to get through the day, right? And I don't blame them for that, but you need to be mindful in some of these organizations. You can't assume everybody is coming to the moment the same as you. So, here we go. Code of Ethics. This is a document, a concise version of the longer 18-page version here. This is the Code of Ethics. It's got a list here of values and then principles. And I won't read you the whole thing. I'll assume you also can Google it. So we have the values, and I'll list the whole row of values. Respect for the inherent dignity and worth of persons. The pursuit of social justice. Service to humanity. Integrity in professional practice. Confidentiality in professional practice. And competence in professional practice. So I think everybody will kind of go, yeah, feel it. We feel it in our heart. Of course, of course, of course, right? The translation into the day-to-day is where things can get gritty and awkward and difficult. So, for example, competence in professional practice. I'll just pick that last one for the next moment here. And then it's got principles. Competence in professional practice. Social workers uphold the right of clients to be offered the highest quality service possible. Well, how often does that actually happen in agencies?
Not as often as it should.
Not every day. No, because if you've got 100 clients and you're only going to be able to see 4 of them today, and you're only able to see those 4 each for like 30 minutes, are you truthfully, depthfully giving each of those clients the highest quality service possible on planet Earth? Let's not bullshit here, right? You're probably not.
No.
You're giving them something functional. You're maybe doing the best you can with what you've got. But truthfully, we are not giving them the highest quality service possible. So the next one, social workers strive to maintain and increase their professional knowledge and skill. Well, yeah, we do. We are always wishing to increase our professional knowledge and skill. And I've talked about this a lot this summer, that as social workers, we're being expected all our career to know everything about Alzheimer's in elderly people, and human development, and economics, and global economics, and air pollution, and water pollution, and indigeneity, and feminism, and Black Lives Matter, and how to use the media, and how to do grant proposals, and 10,000 other things. Social work is the widest profession, perhaps, ever. There's no limit to it. Anything that any human ever might experience that could cause them discomfort anywhere on planet Earth somehow could maybe relate to my professional knowledge and skill. And then at the same time, we have these catastrophes like right now, right here, the 3 of us, where I'm being asked, oh, can you do videos? Can you do computer technology? Can you teach on the web? Do you know these 87 aspects of Blackboard and so on? Part of me is screaming, whoa! No, I don't know all these things. But I'm kind of, muddling through and shuffling through the day. The opioid crisis right now, C-19. Last night on the news they were saying one of the side effects of C-19 for some people is hair loss. Brand new piece of data. We're realizing some consequences of C-19 for some people will be organ scarring and organ failure and trouble. I.e., you might get healed from it, but you might still have a weaker heart, perhaps for the rest of your life. Well, we just found that out a few weeks ago, maybe, right? So when it says here, my competence in professional practice, social workers strive to maintain and increase their professional knowledge and skills. Well, who's paying for that? Who's coaching me? Who's teaching me? Who's nurturing me? In many agencies, so you've just been hired, let's say at a place like Reconnect, are they going to send you to 10 workshops a year? Are they going to buy you 50 books a year? Are they going to let you read those books on company time? Probably not. What is a reasonable amount to expect from each of us in terms of continual professional knowledge and skill development? It's an open-ended question. So when you're first being hired, if you ask, so one of the promises or covenants I have with my profession is this. Oh, new employer, How much are you going to commit to sending me to workshops per year? Can I count on 5 hours a year, 5 minutes a year, $50 a year, 5 books a year? What? Right? Get it in writing. Because otherwise they'll say things like, oh, we really support our staff here.
They just don't specify how.
Yeah, sure you do. Yeah. And not to suggest that your executive directors or supervisors are unkind people, but realistically, much of our profession is just snowed under, right? So ask that stuff. They may not have a budget, and it's better that you know that up front when you have the job. If you want to continue with your professional knowledge and skills, put aside 5% of every paycheck, because you're going to have to do that on your own. Social workers demonstrate due care for clients' interests and safety by limiting professional practice to areas of demonstrated competence. So right now, if you were working in a shelter, a women's shelter, do you have demonstrated competence on dealing with fentanyl, naproxen, opioids? How do opioids interact with diabetes or kidney failure or concurrent addiction? So you have a client who's doing these drugs, but they also drink a lot of liquor, but they're also restricting their food intake, i.e. like on the edge of anorexia. Oh, are you competent in this field? Well, wait a minute, you work in Quesnel. You're the only person. Are you overreaching? Or are you doing the best you can with what you've got in the moment? Right? Every day, these are questions we need to be asking ourselves. And so I would recommend that you ongoingly email these kind of concerns to your direct supervisors and colleagues, that you take initiative. If you feel that you're being asked to do things that you're not competent with, that you make a paper trail claiming, okay, these 3 situations have come up and I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do or say. Who's going to teach me and what's the policy? Give me an email that gives me direction. For your own ethical comfort, for your own soul's courage to go forward each day, but also, being blunt, in case shit ever hits the fan, and let's say a client dies on your watch because of fentanyl or this or that you didn't understand or know about, and somebody says, well, Carlene, this is your fault because you should have done this and that. Well, I did the best I could with what I had, but I didn't have enough, right? The social work profession, I don't want to sound gruesome and doom-saturated, but our profession, about twice a year, somewhere in Canada, a baby will die or a kid will die or something really bad will happen, and someone will turn to a social worker somewhere and say, hey, you didn't visit this kid often enough, you didn't keep an effective paper trail, you didn't advise appropriately, you should have called the police sooner, or you called the police too soon, or right? And it will fall on our shoulders. So we each need to keep some kind of grounding, some kind of platform of solidity and certainty and clarity that links us to the organization, to our code of ethics, to our job description, to the other people in the organization. So if Carlene and I work in an organization with Tuba, and I've got this client with high needs and so on, but meanwhile, I'm about to take a 3-week vacation, and I refer the client to Tuba, but Tuba puts that client at the end of her client check-in list, and some catastrophe happens. Is that Tuba's fault? Is that my fault? Is that the supervisor's fault? Not to say fault matters, but sometimes it will. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, we should all just do the best we can and be compassionate and give 100% each day while we're in our agencies, but sooner or later a bad thing could happen and you want to be ready. Social workers contribute to the ongoing development of the profession and its ability to serve humanity where possible, by participating in the development of current and future social workers and the development of new professional knowledge. So right there, what that often refers to is that if you're in an agency, many times agencies will say, hey, you should go and do this guest lecture somewhere. You should go do this presentation. You should contribute to the development of our knowledge as a profession. You should supervise 2 practicum students this summer. You should do this, you should do that. Well, again, if your job description is already jam-action packed, and then somebody says, hey, well, your social work profession requires you to help build the knowledge of who we are. Here's 2 students to supervise. Yay, you! If you're already feeling up to here, in some organizations, they've now said, if you want me to supervise 2 students or 1 student, I want to get paid extra money. Because this is extra responsibility, it's extra effort, it's one more thing that you've thrown at me on the side of my desk. No, I'm not going to supervise a student unless you pay me 20 cents more an hour or give me a $500 bonus for the summer or something. And part of me goes like, yay, good on you for being more assertive, for setting some boundaries, for recognizing it takes more effort and skill, right? The students don't always see that, but, behind the scenes, maybe we are, you ask me a question and I think, oh, I better go research that. And the next day I come back with an answer. Well, I might have spent an hour on that last night going through my books to find what's the best way to coach you in that direction or mentor you, right? Mm-hmm. Social workers who engage in research must minimize the risk to participants, ensure informed consent, maintain confidentiality, and accurately report the results of their studies. So again, this is our code of ethics. It's what your covenant is with your lifetime career. This is a competence in professional practice. Well, again, if you're being asked to do research at the same time as you're doing 100 other things, who's guiding you in the research? Who's double checking? Who's there as your backup plan? Who do you report to if you see something that you don't think is quite ethical? And again, when you reflect on the whole 100 years or whatever of our profession, social workers were involved with the residential school. We were involved with doing racist, sexist, homophobic things along the way. We've been involved with incarceration, right? Like putting people in jail who breached their probation, or truant girls, putting them in shelters where they were basically under lockdown. Like school homes for wayward girls and stuff like that in our history. Mm-hmm. So that's just one tiny little bit that we just talked about there. Competence in professional practice. And it's big, so it's aspirational, it's inspirational, but it's also vexatious. You want to do the best you can do, maybe once a week or once a month. So you got through the job interview, you got hired, you started to construct that paper trail with the emails, with the who does what, who's who, where's where, all of that. Ongoingly do that. You want to post your code of ethics maybe in the lunchroom so everybody, the dietitian, and everybody gets to see what your platform of responsibilities and wishes is, your code of ethics. But then things get even weirder and more diffuse and nebulous. What if you're someone like me? I'm also an art therapist. So here's the British Columbia Art Therapy Association Code of Ethics. And it also has a whole bunch of really beautiful aspirational kind of things. So the first page, I'll just quickly go through a couple to give you a feel for it. Art therapists shall accurately represent their competence, education, training, experience, professional qualifications, affiliations, and status in the association. Art therapists shall only use the art therapy registration if they've graduated. Art therapists shall provide services only in those areas for which they are qualified by their education, training, and experience. Art therapists shall keep informed of developments in their field, and shall maintain ongoing training and professional development. So here we are again, somebody else saying, you should ongoingly train and develop and take courses and do workshops and learn new skills and read and think and grow. Well, again, many times on whose dime? Whose time? Whose dime and whose time? Beautiful. And I want to let you know, like, you can look around this room. I read a lot of books. I am always learning. And I'm very excited about that. And that's the delight of my life, too, that I always get to learn new things, right? But if you're out there in a practice, in an agency, and you're being asked to do 50 hours of work a week just to keep your clients' heads above water, and then at the end of the year somebody says, well, have you gone to any conferences this year? Any workshops this year? What evidence can you present that you've furthered your professional knowledge this year? That's often the kind of thing that you get asked in an annual review. You know, tell us 10 things you learned this year, and what's your proof that you learned them? I learned to not answer my phone because it makes me cry. That's not a good enough answer for some people. I've learned to delete my email because it makes me want to hide under the bed. They want something a little bit more fancy. So, there you go, right? Like, there's another code of ethics. So, sometimes you kind of have two codes of ethics. You have your job description. You have an understanding of your colleagues and the interdisciplinarity of what you're doing. Here's another layer of, the policies, procedures, the manuals, the documents of your organization. You need to know those, learn them, if you want to, be the best you can be throughout your whole career. Learn them, memorize them, and ask questions about them. Ask questions about them. The job I have at the university, in a million ways, I'm one of the most privileged people on planet Earth. So I would deserve to be slapped in the head if I, was whining the blues to you and crying and, oh, poor me, poor me. But the documents that, for example, I got hired 20 years ago. And I went through a job interview, and there were 3 people who interviewed me. And I had already been teaching at a university for 3 years. And before that, I had lived with a professor for 13 years. So I kind of had a sense of what's what and who's who in academia. Mm-hmm. And then, in the job interview, I talked about art therapy and creativity and feminism and women's issues. And the job description had been about women's issues and a specialist with this kind of area. And I am that. A few years later, I was told by someone at the university that whatever I got hired for is irrelevant. They can tell me to teach anything they want. And I was quite startled by that, because I thought I got hired. The job ad said women's issues, sexual assault. It had a list there. I can't remember right now exactly, but it was me. And I came all across the nation to come here and be me, right? And then I was told by some senior faculty that no, they could ask me, theoretically, they could ask me, go and teach geography, or we want you to go teach this women's studies course, or which is a different department than social work, and it had never even occurred to me that that could happen. But apparently, and it hasn't happened, I'm just saying that it was a shocker to me that the management at UMBC theoretically can ask a prof to teach courses that are surprisingly outside of what I would call my comfort zone. Okay? So you could get hired, let's say, at a social working kind of agency. In the job interview and in your emails and so on, you've done all your good due diligence and clarification. And let's say I'll make this up. Don't quote me, I'm completely making it up. That let's say you got hired by the First Nations Friendship Center to work at Reconnect with Youth. Mm-hmm. And then theoretically, unless you've clarified, maybe 2 years later they say, well, we really need you now to go work in our elders program in Quesnel. Theoretically, in some organizations that could happen. It might be a great thing for you to go and learn a whole bunch of new knowledge about elders in Quesnel versus youth in Prince George. Mm-hmm. So ponder that. Sometimes in big agencies, let's say if you're working with the ministry, they have lots and lots, the Ministry for Child Protection and Child Care and so on, that they could kind of radically rearrange your job description. And if they've never told you they weren't going to do that, they could do that in many situations. So ponder that. So get clear on that part. And I'm you're going to think I'm the most morose and paranoid person. But I'm almost 60. It goes with the territory of getting older. You see more things that you want to warn people about, right? Happy stories just go on and they live their happy lives. It's sad stories that I want to warn y'all about, right? Mm-hmm. You can't always assume 100% that if you're in a unionized environment that your union will protect you or your faculty association will protect you. Sometimes they don't want to deal with the conflict. Sometimes it's not within the realm of what they're doing. So for example, if I said, let's say I'm Colleen's supervisor, and I said, Colleen, I hate you because, what color are your eyes?
They're hazel.
Hazel? I hate hazel-eyed people. Hazel-eyed people always bug me. And they never follow through with things. And I think you suck because of your hazel-eyedness.
Fair enough.
And I torment you about that. There might not be that much you could do because that isn't sexual harassment. That isn't homophobia. That isn't racism.
It's a bully.
I'm being a bully. I'm being an asshole. I'm being awful. And I can really disrupt your day. But there may not be in the faculty association contract or in your organization's policy, there may not be a place that says eye color, especially hazel-eyedness, will not be an issue. I'm being silly. But sometimes there can be things where people do bully you or they treat you bad and you know it's bullying. You know it's disruptive. You know it's ineffective. You know that it's ruining your ability to focus on what you're doing. You know that. But where can you find the exact, if I said, I'm going to be blunt here because that's often how harassment is. If I said, I don't like you because your tits are small. If I was a guy and I said something like that to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, bam. Well, that's sexual harassment. That's a sexual issue. You can probably find a line in the document trail to protect yourself with,
Yeah.
right? But hazel-eyedness, not so much.
You're not talking about a sexualized body part.
Right. So I'm being silly to communicate the idea that I have spoken to many, many people who came to realize, wow, I have a faculty association, but on these issues they couldn't protect me. Or I have a union, and the union is supposed to protect me from troubles in the workplace. But on hazel-eyedness, there was nothing, right? So if you're fortunate enough to work in an organization that has a union, I think only about, maybe just at a complete guess, 20% of social work agencies have the protection of a union. Even if you do have a union or a faculty association or an employee advisory committee or whatever it's called, you can't 100% be sure that will be there. So sometimes you really have to be mindful and thoughtful and do your own best self-care, your own assertiveness, your own boundary management, and be aware of all that stuff in every job that you take. Because the more you've got all this background stuff sorted out in an ongoing way, the more you can be fully present with your clients, with your colleagues, with your best self, because then you're coming from a place of knowledge, clarity, intentionality, and pacing, so that, for example, you can say, oh, every year my code of ethics wants me to, in competence and professional practice, I have to learn 10 things every year. So every month, what's the quietest day of the month? Let's say the day after check day or something with elderly people or whatever. You figure out what your client put. So on that day, I close my office door and I watch some YouTube videos and learn something and keep notes. Sort of, once a month I go to one other agency for 2 hours and I learn about that kindred agency and make a plan for your year, so that if someone says to you at the end of the year, what efforts have you invested in the last year to deepen and expand your competence in professional practice, you can say, the last Thursday of every month, I've gone to a different agency. I went to the Elders Association. I went to the Gay Pride people. I went to Alzheimer's Society. Here's the people I met with. Here's the questions I asked them. This is how I grew my knowledge base.
Yeah.
And you've got it, right? So, in summary, be clear of who has codes of ethics or doesn't, like the real estate agent people in your agency. Be clear on what your job descriptions are. Construct a paper trail if they don't give you one. That's why I always say the email thing. Dear supervisor, I have 3 questions that came to my mind today. Could you please get back to me by Friday with either a yes or a no under item A, B, C? If they don't get back to you, you email it to them and maybe 2 other people in the organization and say, I'm really hoping that someone gets back to me by next Friday. Keep it. Completely super paranoid. I would also recommend that you print that stuff and keep it at home. Because if shit ever does hit the fan, you want to have a backup copy, not just at work. Because the new thing, as we all know nowadays, is if there's ever any kind of conflict, some agencies will walk you off site with 1 minute's notice. You show up at work on a Tuesday afternoon at 9 o'clock, a security person is beside you and they say, please clear out your desk. You're leaving until this issue is resolved. We had 3 faculty walked off campus last year or the year before precisely like that. They were accused of harassment or whatever they were accused of. I can't get into it because I'm not knowledgeable about it. But my memory is 3 faculty, and remember, we're people who are very privileged, right? We have a faculty association. We have
things in place to look after you.
Things in place, that's right, yeah. Versus a small nonprofit where there's 1 supervisor and 3 staff, right? Yeah. We have protections built in and certain dignities and control. But my understanding is 3, maybe even more than 3, were just walked off campus like that. They weren't told what they were accused of. They weren't told anything. They were just told, clear your desk, give us your keys, we're done for now. We'll get back to you in the days ahead or the weeks ahead or the months ahead. Do not have contact with your, in their case, students, but with your clients. Do not have contact with your colleagues. Right? So if every piece of paper that we've been talking about here in this particular video, if all of that was in your office file and none of it was at home, you're vulnerable. You are really vulnerable right now. Yeah. So sometimes the best way to have a happy life is to perform a little bit of paranoia. You've often heard the one of good fences make good neighbors. I tend to believe that if you have good clear boundaries around who you are and what you do and how people get in and out of your life and your job and your task and your to-do list and so on, if everybody's really, really clear, and you do this diplomatically and with kindness, dear so-and-so, my understanding is that this is what I'm being asked to do in this, let's see, your boss says, Joe, we want you to facilitate, you've been hired for 3 months, you're supposed to be working with individuals, new plan, new funder, new thing, new contract, new project. Your boss says, from now on, we want you on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights to be co-facilitating a group for depression. This could be wonderful. This is excellent. But maybe right now you don't know very much about facilitating a group for depression. Is your boss going to give you 3 days to go and read and prepare and so on?
Or are they just expecting that you already know how to do this?
Yeah, you just show up. It's tomorrow night. So you facilitate the group for a couple of months and you do the best you can. But then maybe a client complains and says, you're completely ineffective. And you might think, yeah, because I don't know very much about this. I'm just learning as I go.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to have in place, oh, they asked you to do this group. You now email back and say, oh, 4 months ago when I was hired, I was told I would be doing individual work. This is quite a surprise. I'm prepared to do this. I'm flexible. I'm imaginative. I'm very robust and curious. But will I be given 3 days to prepare? And then if they email back and say, no, you just do this, keep that at home in case you get fired by some supervisor a year down the road who says clients have complained that you don't seem very professional about facilitating a depression workshop.
Yeah, later in the year when they're reviewing their budgets and whatever, and they're looking for some sort of way to, or some sort of scapegoat, at least, yeah, cover your own butt and cover your own tracks so that you can say that all the things that you've done has been not necessarily with the approval of your superiors, but in, like, it hasn't gone against anything that they've said.
You've done the best you could with the knowledge you had, with the direction you had, with the mentoring you've had, and you'll feel more confident every day when you go to work. You will be a better worker when you know all of this stuff, and you can just kind of clearly put it out. And then you can also facilitate that with each new person that you mentor that gets hired the year after you or 2 years after you. Right? You can say, oh, look, this is my job description. What's your job description? Because if we're going to interface somewhere in here, you need to know this is as far as I can go, oh, new dietitian, or oh, new real estate person, right? This is how this goes.
Yeah.
Our profession is, I would have to say, about once a month for 40 years now, I've heard a story where people weren't doing this good best practice, and somebody got glitched or itched or bitched because of this, right? Like that. Oh, all of a sudden she wants me to do this, and I didn't know, or oh, I thought she was doing that, and no one told me, or right? It's part of who you are as a practitioner, not just to be loving and compassionate and available for your clients, but be loving and compassionate and curious about your own role and your own collegiality and so on. And all of these papers, so in my case, I'm governed by you could say, the Canadian Association of Schools of Social Work Codes of Ethics. I'm governed by the mission statement of the School of Social Work at UNBC. I'm governed by the Faculty Association contract, which gets renegotiated every 3 years or so. I'm governed by UNBC's Code of Ethics, which is not always in direct. When you open your basic, your calendar of the whole school year, there's a Code of Ethics in there, and I think the School of Social Work goes above and beyond that, but it also guides me, and it may seem at first glance like all these things would be in harmony, but sometimes they're not, or sometimes they're open to different interpretations. For example, we are a school of structural social work, which could be thought of as like a socialist school of social work, or a sociologically oriented school of social work. Okay? So, for example, I very much believe in unions. Unions, yay, unions, love them, love them, love them, love them. So when I first came here and we had no union, which is our faculty association, we only unionized about 6 years ago. So the first 14 years or so, I was like, where's the union? Where's our faculty association? What? How can this be that we don't have a collective place that protects and cares for us? When we had to actually all vote on having a union, the faculty association. And at the time I thought, who are these people? Of course we're going to vote yes. Who would not want to have a collective group of best interest self-care comrades? But there were people who were opposed to having a union. I was quite startled, but to this day I remember their faces. I was like, there's something very different about your worldview from mine, right? So, in summary, in social work, whether it's social work with victims of abuse, or social work and family counseling, or women in social policy, beginning with the job description, that's in the paper or on the computer now, or in the future in the hologram or the mind meld that someone will send you, the chip that gets inserted in your wrist or something.
Yeah.
What's the job description at that point? After the job interview, negotiate it and get clear. Ongoingly, inquire, keep a paper trail, explore what are the codes of ethics or documents that govern my other coworkers, what's my professional, sometimes it's dual. There are people who do, let's say, training in criminology or training in alcohol and counseling, but are also social workers. Explore that. Look at your department or your organization. If you're the ministry, let's say, and there's all across Canada or the province, there's other bodies. If you're Elizabeth Fry is an organization that I think is about 100 years old, and it's all over the Western world. So what were the original wishes of the original Elizabeth Fry? What is the national declarations and policies like? And then what are your local? And so on. All that stuff is your responsibility. At any moment, the people in your agency and your clients are entitled to look you in the eye and say, so, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Who authorized you to do that? And being able to, I don't know, I'm just muddling around, right? That's not a good answer. You should always be able to say, I'm doing this because it's part of my job description, because my direct supervisor said this 7 years ago, because this was how the funder wished us to follow through, right? You be able to have very clear, substantive accountability and clarity. I'm surprised by how few people actually do, myself included at different points in my career. I don't want to sound like I've got this all magically figured out. But there's people who have never read the policy documents of their organization, or there's big gaps in things that go on in the organization, and people just go off and do stuff. Oh, I just do this because it seemed like a thing to do. Well, who authorized you to do that? If something ever goes really wrong. So, thank you for coming to this video with us. Thank you, Tuba, our favorite Steven Spielberg in the whole world. Thank you, Carlene. Thank you, everybody who watches this. And we're going to call this one Documents.